They beat me, continued Alex, his voice breaking. All of them with their boots, with rifle butts. They kept asking me who I worked for. The DEA, the government? I kept screaming that I was just a student, that I only cared about the trees, but they didn't believe me. Or maybe they didn't care. Comandante Valles, he was the one who broke my leg. He jumped on it. I heard it crack, and then they just laughed and left. They left me bleeding in the forest kilometers from here. But how did you get here? Asked Zeynep, confusion mixed with horror. If they left you so far away? I don't know, whispered Alex. I crawled. I don't know for how long, days or one long night. Lost consciousness. Woke up in the rain. So thirsty. I just knew I had to move, get away from that place. My hands dragged me along. He lifted his destroyed hands as proof. I saw this trailer, looked abandoned, a shelter. I thought I could just die here under a roof. Was on the floor, right here, shaking from cold, and I felt the boards were loose. I don't know why. Instinct, I guess. I pushed and found the hole. This hole, I thought here. Here they won't find me. It's dark down here. I managed to pull the boards back over myself and just stayed here. Listening. Waiting for them to come back. Waiting to die. The silence that followed was dense. Charged with the truth of what he had just confessed. Zeynep understood. This boy hadn't just witnessed a crime. He had witnessed the heart of Don Artemio's empire. And 50,000 wasn't a reward. It was the price for his silence. Forever. Zeynep remained motionless in the cold of the hole. The silence was total, broken only by Alex's labored breathing and the dripping of condensation water on the earth. 50,000. Drug trafficking. Corrupt police. Don Artemio. Each word was another nail in a coffin. She had come to this abandoned trailer to escape hunger and had fallen directly into the mouth, not of a wolf, but of a monster. Her first instinct was animal. Cover the hole. Pretend she had never seen him. Take her children and run without looking back, even though they had nowhere to go. What was this foreign boy's life worth compared to the lives of her 5 children? If Don Artemio discovered she was hiding him, they wouldn't just throw them out. They would make them disappear. All of them. Her Emirhan, the twins, Tadeo, little Mert. They would be just another story of people who went north and never arrived. The terror was so physical it cut off her breath. But then she looked at Alex. Really looked at him. She saw the dried blood in his hair, the way his body trembled uncontrollably from fever and pain. She saw his destroyed hands, hands that should have been writing in a notebook, not digging their own grave. And she thought of Ramiro. She thought of her last promise. Take care of my boys, Sola. How could she take care of them if she taught them with her own example that it was okay to let a human being die from fear? How could she raise good men and women if she herself became complicit in a murder through silence? What kind of home would that be, built on the bones of an innocent? You're not going to die here, Zeynep said finally, her voice trembling but filled with a conviction she didn't know she possessed. And they're not going to find you. We're going to find a way. The first week was an exercise in impossible tension. During the day, Alex burned with fever. Zeynep gave him the penicillin powder dissolved in boiled water 3 times a day and cleaned the wound with mezcal twice daily. The smell of alcohol and infection clung to the trailer walls. The children developed an elaborate warning system they called the Lookout. They spread out in the forest surrounding the trailer with clear instructions. If they saw any stranger, Tadeo would cry. The twins would run screaming, and Emirhan would whistle like a quail, the signal for maximum alert. Inside the trailer, Alex floated between consciousness and delirium. The fever consumed him. Zeynep kept him hydrated with water from the stream and fed him with the precious little cornmeal they had, now divided among 7 instead of 6. Hunger was a constant pain in everyone's stomach. Zeynep almost never slept. She sat beside the boy, changing wet cloths on his forehead, listening. In the darkness of the trailer with the children sleeping huddled in the other corner, Alex talked in his delirium. He spoke of snow, of mountains in Colorado, of a mother who made pizza, of a dog named Buddy. He talked in fevered fragments about the beauty of the trees he had come to save, about how he couldn't understand why men killed for money, for powder. Zeynep listened. In those fevered murmurs, she didn't see an American spy. She saw a son. She saw the innocence she was fighting to protect in Emirhan. Sitting in the darkness, she whispered back to him. She told him about Ramiro, about how he laughed, about how his hands were strong. She talked about the eviction, the humiliation, the fear she felt every night of being unable to protect her children. An unlikely alliance formed in that piece of oxidized metal, a bond forged in shared fear and human decency. He was her secret, her burden, but also, strangely, her connection to a world of ideals she thought no longer existed. She was protecting not just a boy, but proof that her husband, Ramiro, hadn't died in vain. That kindness still mattered. But reality called sooner than expected. The corn was running out. Alex's wound, though not getting worse, wasn't improving. He needed real food. Zeynep would have to go to town. She would have to take a risk. On the 8th day, the situation was unsustainable. The last handful of corn was gone in the watery atoll the morning before. The baby Mert was crying weakly against Zeynep's dry breast. Her milk was drying up from hunger. The hunger of her other 4 children was a sharp pain, a heavy silence in the trailer that was worse than any cry. Emirhan, pale with deep shadows under his eyes, looked at her with adult eyes. "Mama, Tadeo is very hungry." "We have nothing left." Zeynep knew she couldn't wait any longer. Alex needed real food to fight the fever consuming him, and her own children were wasting away. She had to go to town. The thought filled her with icy dread. Leaving Alex, who was still delirious with Emirhan as his only protector, was terrifying. But walking the 5 kilometers to Krell, where Don Artemio's men surely kept watch, was worse, and who could she trust? The priest had already proven weak, bending to pressure from respectable families. The trucker Chivo was a possibility. He had offered credit and respect, but his ranch was in the opposite direction, and he was unpredictable, rough. Could she really trust a man with a secret that could get them all killed? That left one name, Don Elias, the old shopkeeper. Zeynep remembered how he had looked at her when she bought the trailer, not with pity but with recognition, like someone who had seen the bottom of desperation and respected it. He had given her Pinole without being asked. He was an old man, a pillar of the town who must know Don Artemio's crimes better than anyone. Perhaps his apparent neutrality hid a deep hatred for the man poisoning the Sierra. It was a desperate gamble, but it was the only one she had. She left Emirhan in charge, giving him the rusted machete they had found. "Emirhan, this is real now, not a game," she said, her voice low and fierce. "If anyone comes close, if you hear a truck, any truck, you don't open that door. You scream. You scream like you're dying, and you protect your sisters. Understand? Protect this trailer, no matter what it costs." The 12-year-old nodded, his knuckles white, gripping the machete handle. Zeynep left the trailer feeling naked, every inch of her skin on alert. The hour-and-a-half walk to Krell was torture. Every branch that cracked sounded like a rifle being loaded. When she arrived in the dusty streets, they seemed like a battlefield to her. She forced herself to walk slowly, to not look scared, to nod hello to the few people she saw. She entered La Sierra store. The bell above the door rang, a sound so sharp it seemed like a fire alarm. Thank God. The store was empty except for Don Elias, who was arranging cans of chilies on a shelf. "Buenos dias." "Don Elias," said Zeynep, surprised by the calm in her voice. The old man turned. His small, sharp eyes studied her over his glasses. "Doña Zeynep, what a surprise. I thought the cold had already driven you from that trash heap." "We're managing," said Zeynep. "I need you to extend me credit." "The trucker told me you would. I'll pay you next week when I finish washing clothes." Don Elias shrugged. The trucker is a man of his word. "What are you going to take?" 5 kilos of corn, 2 of beans, lard, salt." She paused, her heart rising into her throat. "And do you have rubbing alcohol?" "Hydrogen peroxide. It's just that one of my children, Tadeo, fell in the riverbed. Cut his knee on a rock and it looks very bad. It's swollen and very hot. There's infection starting." There was a long silence. Don Elias put down the can of chilies he was holding very slowly, his sharp eyes, which seemed to see through skin, fixed on Zeynep. He didn't look at her face, but at her hands. Calloused hands, yes, but also trembling, white at the knuckles from tension. Then his gaze rose slowly to her eyes, and Zeynep felt like that old man could see every lie, every fear, every hidden truth she carried. The shopkeeper said nothing for a moment. A silence so long that Zeynep began to fear she had made a fatal mistake. Finally, Don Elias sighed, a long, tired sound that seemed to come from the depths of his 80 years of life. "Tadeo," he said quietly, almost to himself. "The 5-year-old, right? Strong boy. But it's not for him that you're buying this, is it, Doña Zeynep?" Zeynep's heart stopped. Panic flooded through her, cold and paralyzing. She wanted to run, to deny, to grab her things and flee, but her feet were glued to the ground. Don Elias looked at her, and there was no accusation in his eyes, only deep sadness. Slowly he walked to the front door, raised his hand, and turned the open sign to closed. The click of the lock turning echoed in the silence like a gunshot. Zeynep felt the world shrink to this small store. "Listen, Senora," the old man continued, his voice still low, walking back behind the counter. "I've been at this counter for 40 years. I've seen this town go from being a small ranch to being Don Artemio's personal hell. I know everyone who walks through that door. I know who buys on credit because they have nothing, and who steals because they're bad. And I've seen you. I saw you when you slept under the bridge, and I saw you go to that trailer with your 5 children. That's called desperation. But what I see in your eyes now, that's terror. That's the terror of someone hiding something that could kill them." He leaned forward slightly, his voice barely a whisper. 6 days without coming, and now you're buying food for a regiment and alcohol for a gunshot wound. It's not Tadeo, Senora. It's the boy, the American they're looking for." Zeynep collapsed. It was as if her legs, her spine, her will all dissolved. She grabbed the counter to keep from falling, and the tears she had held back for 8 days poured out. Tears hot with hunger, with fear, and with an unbearable terror. "My children are starving," she managed to say, her voice breaking. He has his leg. God, it smells like death. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. I found him there. I couldn't let him die." Don Elias didn't interrupt her. He let her cry, his face impassive, but his eyes full of a somber compassion. "What you're doing, daughter," he said finally, using a word that disarmed her completely, "is suicidal madness. You know what they'll do to you if they find out. You know what they'll do to your children. Don Artemio doesn't play games. That boy saw the airstrip." Zeynep felt her head lift abruptly, her tear-filled eyes full of surprise. You knew?" "We all know," said Elias bitterly. "Everyone who's been here more than 2 days knows what happens in the Sierra. We know about the hollow lumber, the packages, the weapons, and we know to keep our mouths shut. Because the one who speaks, or the one who helps the one who speaks, ends up floating in the river, or doesn't wake up at all. What you did by taking that boy out of that hole was signing your death sentence and your children's." "I couldn't let him die," whispered Zeynep, wiping her tears with fury. "My children were hungry, but I couldn't let a human being rot under my floor. What kind of mother would I be if I taught them that? What kind of world are we leaving if we all stay silent?" Don Elias looked at her for a long, long moment. A strange light flickered in his old eyes, something Zeynep couldn't decipher. Admiration, perhaps. Pity. Finally, he nodded as if he had made a decision. "You have courage that you don't see anymore, Doña Zeynep, or you have a very great madness. Perhaps they're the same thing." He moved through the store with surprising agility for his age. He put 5 kilos of corn in a sack, the beans, the lard, but then added a package of dried meat, a block of ranch cheese, and a large bag of animal crackers for the children. "There," he said, pushing everything toward her. Then he went to the back. Zeynep heard the sound of bottles. He returned with a cardboard box. "There's no rubbing alcohol or hydrogen peroxide here," he said quietly. "That draws too much attention. This is better." He opened the box. It was full of small bottles of cheap mezcal, the kind that burns. "This will kill the infection better than alcohol. Clean the wound with this and this." He took out a glass jar with no label, full of a yellow powder. "What is it?" asked Zeynep. "Penicillin for cattle, but it works the same on men. Mix a little with boiled water and have him drink it 3 times a day. If he survives the fever, this will save him from gangrene." Zeynep stared at him, unable to believe it. "Don Elias, why? Why are you doing this?" "Because I'm tired," said the old man, his voice suddenly full of cold poison. "I'm tired of seeing that man steal the Sierra, poison our youth, and kill anyone who opposes him. Do you know? I had a grandson. He was the age of that American boy. He wanted to be a forest engineer. He started asking questions, just like the American, questions about logging, about permits. 2 years ago, he fell off a cliff while measuring trees. Don Artemio even came to my store to offer his condolences." The pain in the old man's voice was so palpable that Zeynep shivered. "Helping you won't bring my grandson back. But if that boy lives, if he makes it out of here and tells what he saw, it's a small stone in that monster's shoe. And for that, it's worth the risk." The old man looked out the window, verifying the street, but spoke in a near whisper. "You can't stay in that trailer. It's the first place they'll search if someone saw you. You need to go somewhere else. Somewhere safe. We have nowhere to go, said Zeynep. Desperation returning. There is a place, said Don Elias. 3 days' travel, crossing the canyon toward the desert. An old abandoned mining camp, La Escondida. It's difficult to reach, but there are people there. People who also hide from Artemio. People who lost everything like you have, but they need documents. The American can't travel like this, and neither can you. Not with 5 children and a wounded man. They'll have the rural police watching for you, and they have the boy's photograph. Documents? Asked Zeynep. I can get papers, said the old man. A false federal transit permit saying you're a health brigade worker and he's an assistant who had an accident, and birth certificates for your children. Not perfect. A trained eye will know it's fake, but if they don't look closely, it'll work. It'll give you enough time to reach the canyon route. Can you really do that? Whispered Zeynep. I can, but it takes time. 2 weeks, no less. That's how long I need to get the right stamps. 2 weeks exactly. Come back then. 2 weeks, repeated Zeynep. Somehow they would survive. And the route, continued Don Elias. I can't draw you a map. Too risky. But when you come back for the papers, I'll tell you from memory. When you know the way you can't write it down. It's too dangerous if they search you. Zeynep left Don Elias's store with a heavy sack on her back and a cardboard box in her arms. The mezcal and penicillin were hidden under the dried meat and corn. Each step back to the trailer felt like a paranoia-filled nightmare. Every farmer she passed seemed like a spy. The afternoon sun burned the back of her neck, and the weight of the food was nothing compared to the weight of the secret. The first thing she did when she arrived was give the children food. Zeynep made thick corn tortillas with lard and salt and gave each of the older children a piece of dried meat. The animal crackers were distributed like treasure, one by one. Watching her children chew, watching little Mert drink from her breast, which now had a little milk again, gave Zeynep the strength to endure, but there was no time for relief. That night, as Zeynep was boiling water in the small metal pot they had found, a sound shattered the darkness. It wasn't a horse. It was the unmistakable sound of an engine. A large truck forcing its way down the narrow forest path. Before she could react, she heard Emirhan's sharp whistle, the quail call. Maximum alert, Zeynep's blood froze. The sound of the engine grew louder. It was a large truck struggling up the narrow path. Her hands went cold. It was a truck, 2 trucks, 4 men. Zeynep's heart stopped when she recognized the man who got out of the first truck. It was the foreman from the sawmill, the one with the sweaty mustache who had made that indecent proposal. And next to him, in the uniform of the rural police, with a gun on his belt, was Comandante Valles, the same man who, according to Alex, had broken his leg. Zeynep's first instinct was absolute terror, but she forced herself to move. The children, she had to protect them. She quickly whispered urgent orders as her children ran to huddle in the darkest corner of the trailer, under the pile of pine needles and the one blanket they had. Alex was still weak but conscious. Zeynep and Emirhan grabbed him, and without time to move him to the hole, which was covered by the rotted mattress and boards, they dragged him to the far end, under the rusted sink. It was a tiny space, barely a cabinet without doors. Get in, she ordered Alex in a whisper. Curl up, now. Alex, understanding the panic, used his last strength to squeeze into the space. Zeynep threw the pile of dirty rags over him, piled the metal pots and pans on top. It looked like a pile of garbage. Barely had she finished when the truck screeched to a stop outside. The metallic sound of doors slamming was deafening in the small trailer. 2 trucks, 4 men. Zeynep stepped outside, using her body to block the entrance. Buenos dias, señores, she said, forcing her voice to stay steady. Can I help you? We're far from the road. The man who climbed out of the first truck was Comandante Valles. She recognized him from Alex's description. His cruel small eyes traveled up and down her body, lingering on her bare feet. Buenos dias, señora. I'm Comandante Valles. We're looking for someone, an American, tall, blonde. He got lost a few weeks ago. Don Artemio is very concerned about him. He's offering 50,000 pesos for anyone who finds him. The foreman spat tobacco near her feet. We were told a widow moved into this dump just when the American disappeared around here. Strange timing, isn't it? Nothing suspicious, I hope. Zeynep forced a tired smile onto her face. An American? Senor, with difficulty do I know what happens in town. Here we just see coyotes and snakes. Haven't seen anyone, only silence. Valles studied her. His gaze was calculating. Zeynep's mind raced. The fear she felt for her children was overwhelming, but she kept it from her face. "What's that smell?" Valles asked, his nose wrinkling. "Smells like a cantina and medicine." Her heart jumped. The mezcal. The penicillin. The quick lie she had prepared for Don Elias came pouring out. It's my son Tadeo," she said rapidly. "He fell in the riverbed, cut his knee on a rock, and it got infected badly. Don Elias gave me some mezcal and some powders to clean it. He has a fever." Valles studied her, his expression calculating, and Zeynep saw it in his eyes, doubt. He didn't believe her. But he also didn't care enough to investigate further. "And you live here alone?" he asked, his hand resting casually on his gun holster, just to remind her he had it. "Just you and the children?" "That takes courage." "It's not courage, senor, it's necessity," replied Zeynep. "My husband died. This is all we have." "We're not going to bother you," said Valles, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Just give us a look around, just to make sure you haven't seen anything." Zeynep's knees nearly buckled, but she remained standing. "Of course, Comandante. Please, just don't scare the children. They're afraid." It was the worst moment of her life. The Comandante and the foreman entered the trailer, having to duck their heads in the low doorway. The space was impossibly small for two large men plus Zeynep and the children. The smell of humidity, cheap mezcal, and the vague, sweet reek of infection was suffocating. A punch to the face. "Let's see," said Valles, his voice echoing in the metal box. "Where's that sick boy you mentioned?" Zeynep's mouth went dry, but she pointed to the corner. They're all sleeping in that corner." Got scared when they heard the trucks. Valles walked to the far corner, his heavy boots clanging on the patched floor. He passed within half a meter of the cabinet under the sink where Alex was hiding. Zeynep felt her breath stop. If he looked, if he noticed even a slight movement. But the foreman, meanwhile, had moved toward the sink. "What the hell is this?" he said more to himself. He lifted his heavy boot and kicked hard at the pile of dirty rags and pots covering Alex. The metallic clang was deafening in the small space. Zeynep's mind went blank. She was sure she would hear a scream, feel the gun go off, see the end of everything. But there was nothing. Just the sound of the pots settling, just trash and stinking rags. The foreman spat, wiping his boot on the floor. The fat man moved back toward the other side of the trailer, clearly bored and disgusted by the place. Valles reached the corner where the children huddled. With a rough, contemptuous gesture, he pulled back their only blanket. Emirhan stared at him with silent hatred, protecting his sisters with his body. Tadeo trembled, his eyes like saucers, but his knee, though dirty, was clearly not infected. It was healthy. Too healthy. "You said he was sick," growled Valles, his suspicion a palpable poison. I cleaned it with the mezcal," stammered Zeynep. "That's why he looks better." "But he still has fever. Please don't scare them." Valles observed the children, their faces pale not from sickness but from hunger and fear. He looked at the misery of the place, the filth, the decay. He sighed, a mixture of frustration and disgust. "Let's get out of here, Chewy. This place stinks of poverty and sour milk, not American. If he were here, he'd be dead by now from the smell alone." He turned toward the door with difficulty. "Disculpe the inconvenience, senora," he called from outside, his voice heavy with sarcasm. "If you see a blonde American, don't bother reporting it. I doubt it's worth the trip up to this garbage pile." Zeynep didn't move. She heard truck doors slam, engines roar to life, and the sound of tires crushing vegetation as they turned around. She didn't breathe, didn't move, didn't cry until the sound of the motors completely faded, absorbed by the dense forest silence. For an entire minute after the last echo of the engine disappeared, Zeynep remained frozen like a statue of salt next to the entrance. Her children stayed huddled in the corner. No one breathed, no one moved. Finally, with a tremor that shook her entire body, Zeynep moved. She wasn't toward her children. She lunged toward the sink, ripping away the pots and dirty rags with frantic hands. "Alex! Alex, for God's sake, answer me!" At first, there was no response. The boy's body was inert, impossibly pale, eyes closed. Zeynep thought she had killed him, that the impact had done what hunger and infection couldn't. Then Alex whispered, barely audible, "They're gone." Zeynep heard him gasp for air as she helped him out of the space, dragging him with desperation back to the pile of pine needles. His mouth was full of blood. When he had kicked the cabinet, the impact had forced Alex to bite his lower lip nearly in half to keep from screaming. The pain had to have been white-hot, agonizing, but he had remained silent. Completely silent, Zeynep looked at her children. When Amirhan and the girls finally dared to move, when they saw the blood in Alex's mouth, they understood. They understood that they had just survived something that could have destroyed them all. "We can't wait," said Zeynep, her voice suddenly empty of all fear, replaced by a cold, terrible certainty. Vales didn't believe me. He saw Tadeo's knee wasn't actually infected. He'll come back. He'll be more careful next time, and he won't be so kind. "But the papers," whispered Alex, spitting blood. 2 weeks. There is no time for papers, said Zeynep flatly. Tonight, when it gets dark. That afternoon was a fever of silent, desperate preparation. Zeynep gathered what little they had. A sack with the remaining corn and beans. A manta with strips of dried meat. 2 metal bottles filled with water from the stream. The penicillin and last bottle of mezcal. That was all for 7 people on a journey of 3 days through forest and then through a canyon to the desert. But Alex couldn't walk. His leg was destroyed, and the beating from the foreman's kick had made it worse. Zeynep had Amirhan search for the strongest branch he could find in the forest, long as a man, thick as an arm. Using strips of cloth she tore from what remained of her skirt, she created a crude crutch. It was a solution born of desperation, but it was something. "You're going to lean on this and on me," she told Alex grimly. "Your good leg will push and you'll hop. It will be slow, it will hurt, and your leg might get worse. But we move now or we die here, understand?" Alex nodded, his single good eye filled with gratitude and terror in equal measure. At 3 in the morning, when the moon was hidden and the darkness was absolute, they left. Amirhan carried Tadeo on his back. The twin girls held each other's hands. Zeynep carried little Mert tied to her chest and helped support Alex's weight as he hopped on his makeshift crutch. They moved in silence through the forest, staying away from the main path, guided only by Zeynep's instinct and half-remembered directions. It was slow, agonizingly slow. Every step was a battle. The forest at night was a maze of roots and hidden stones that tripped them, branches that cut their skin, darkness that was almost physical in its density. They could hear nothing but their own breathing and the occasional snap of a twig beneath their feet. But that silence was the worst. In it lived the fear that trucks might be coming, that searchlights might find them, that bullets might start flying. They walked until dawn broke gray and cold, revealing they were on a steep hillside, far from any road. They collapsed behind a group of large rocks, hidden by scrubby vegetation. The first day of travel was a torture that redefined suffering for Zeynep. Moving in near darkness through unmarked forest was nightmarish. At a glacial pace, every step a fight. The crutch kept getting caught on roots or slipping on pine needles, and with each stumble, a choked groan escaped Alex's lips, sounds that made Zeynep tense. Waiting for alarms that never came, she and Amirhan bore most of Alex's weight. Amirhan's face, already pale from fear and hunger, turned the color of ash as he pushed from behind, trying to help support the wounded boy. The twins stumbled along holding each other, their small shoes destroyed by rocks and branches. Amirhan carried Tadeo, who had stopped complaining and simply clung to his brother's neck, understanding that survival meant silence. Twice, Alex collapsed entirely, his body simply giving out. Each time, Zeynep and Amirhan had to practically carry him, his arm over their shoulders, his destroyed leg dragging uselessly. Each time, for just a moment, Alex would beg them to leave him. "Go," he would whisper. "I'm slowing you down. The coyotes will find me. Save your children." Each time, Zeynep would grab him and pull him back up with a voice like a whip. "You're coming with us or I'm staying here with you." Those are your options. Choose. Alex would choose life, and they would continue. They stopped only when the first gray light of dawn painted the eastern sky. They were on a steep slope, far from any visible path. They collapsed behind some rocks, completely exhausted, unable to move further. Zeynep distributed meager rations. 1 thin tortilla for each of the older children, half for Alex, the rest for the little ones. They drank small sips of water from their bottles. The silence was broken only by their ragged breathing and Mert's weak cry. "How far?" asked Amirhan, his voice hollow with exhaustion. "I don't know," admitted Zeynep, wiping sweat from her forehead despite the cold. "Maybe the same distance as yesterday, maybe less. We need to move again when it gets darker." They huddled together for warmth, fitfully dozing until midday, when Zeynep forced them to move again, keeping to the forest. watching the sun's position to maintain direction toward the canyon that Don Elias had described so vaguely. The second day was worse. Hunger was becoming its own torture. The children moved like ghosts, barely speaking. Alex had stopped complaining, which worried Zeynep more than his cries. When a person stopped asking for help, it meant they had given up on living. By late afternoon of the second day, the forest began to change. The trees thinned. The ground became rockier. And then, without warning, the ground simply ended. They stood at the edge of a massive chasm, the canyon of the Copper River. Hundreds of meters deep, walls of red rock, an abyss of shadow and distance. Where Don Elias said to cross, there was nothing but emptiness. Zeynep looked at the void, then at her children, then back at the void. "We have to go down," she said to the forest, to the sky, to no one in particular. The impossibility of it was so complete that, for a moment, she considered simply sitting down and waiting for death. But then she heard the sound. Faint but distinct, the sound of engines, following them. The Commandante hadn't given up. They had been found. The widow, Zeynep's secret room, a discovery that changed a family's destiny. Zeynep heard a sound coming from beneath the earth as she cleaned the dusty floor of an old, abandoned metal trailer. A sound from below the ground. She didn't know what kind of sound it was, but she felt that this sound would change her family's fate forever. Can you imagine losing everything in your life, even hope itself, and then being forced to live in a piece of rusted metal in the middle of nowhere? Then, directly under your feet, beneath the dark earth, you find that something or someone has been hidden there, waiting for you like a secret left behind. This seemed like a movie plot, but it happened exactly as described in 1987 in the mountains of Chihuahua. And what that woman found beneath those grounds was not just a secret. It was a secret capable of destroying the powerful and rewriting the very meaning of human value. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and hit the like button, because the ending of this story will give you chills until the very last second. Tell me in the comments, would you have the courage to descend into a dark cave discovered beneath the floor of your own home? I'm curious what your heart would say in that moment. Zeynep Martinez was 38 years old when her world shattered. It was 1987 when the truck carrying apple harvest workers overturned on a dangerous curve known as the Spine. Her husband, Ramiro, never came home. The agricultural company, after months of evasion and empty promises, slipped an envelope into her trembling hands. Inside were a few thousand pesos, a pittance. 150,000 pesos in those days, barely enough to survive a month. 150,000 pesos that represented the life of a good man, a father of 5. 150,000 pesos that could fit in the pocket of her worn-out apron. Zeynep was now a widow, responsible for 5 hungry mouths. The oldest was Emirhan, 12 years old, slowly beginning to understand that he was now the man of the house. The twin girls, Nisa and Nita, were 9 years old. Little Tadeo was 5 and baby Mert was still nursing. Ramiro had been her anchor, a quiet man with strong hands, who always returned from the fields with a tired smile and a hidden sweet for each child. Zeynep still remembered their last morning together. He had kissed her forehead before climbing into that truck. "Take care of my children, Zeynep," he had said. "Promise me they'll make it." She had promised without, knowing that promise would become a sentence of daily struggle, surviving without Ramiro's income was more brutal than any promise could have anticipated. Without his salary, the owner of the small adobe room where they lived gave them 2 weeks to evacuate. Zeynep had no close family. Everyone had migrated north to Ciudad Juarez or beyond. She found herself on the street, dependent on the charity of the parish and the meager income from washing other people's clothes in the river. For 3 months they slept on the floor of the sacristy thanks to Father Javier's mercy. But pressure from the town's respectable families grew. They didn't approve of a widow and her 5 children occupying God's house. Zeynep knew her time there was running out. It was on a cold November morning that everything changed. The sacristan, Don Chema, a man of few words, told her that the landlord had burned what little belongings they hadn't managed to take with them. Zeynep felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. Where would she go? How would she survive? Only 80,000 pesos remained from that compensation, hidden in a sock tied around her waist, money she had sworn never to touch except in a life-or-death emergency. This was that emergency. For days she walked with baby Mert pressed against her chest and the other four clinging to her skirt, asking at every gate. She sought work, a roof, anything. But in a small town like Krell, a woman alone with 5 children wasn't an opportunity. She was a problem. Doors closed with polite but firm excuses. "We already have someone helping us, ma'am. There's no room for so many people. Maybe try the sawmill. They might need a cook." But they don't accept children. And then there were the other looks. The looks from men who saw her desperation as an invitation. The sawmill foreman. A fat man with a sweaty mustache looked her up and down. "A young woman like you shouldn't be struggling so much," he said, his voice insinuating. "I could offer you a comfortable little house, good food, in exchange for some company." Zeynep felt acid rise in her throat. "I'm looking for honest work, sir," she replied, turning away and leaving with whatever dignity she had left, her children's cries following her like a shadow. For 3 nights they huddled under a stone bridge, covered with cardboard that Emirhan had found. The Sierra's cold penetrated their bones, and Zeynep spent the nights trembling, not from cold, but from fear that her children would fall ill, that rural police would take them away. It was on a gray afternoon, as wind swept dust and pine needles across the landscape, that Zeynep entered the grocery store, La Sierra. She was dizzy with hunger but held herself upright, refusing to appear weak. Behind the wooden counter, 2 men in muddy boots were drinking soda. Zeynep recognized one of them. It was Chivo, a cargo hauler with a dilapidated truck. The other was a stranger, a lumber buyer. "That trailer is still rotting out there," said Chivo, wiping his mouth. "The owner, that crazy American, died years ago and nobody claimed it. The municipality wants to remove it, but it's too deep in the forest. It costs them more to move it. Who would want that piece of junk? It's in the middle of nowhere." The other man continued. "That trailer is more rusted than cheese. They say the American, some guy named Howard, was mixed up in strange things. He just disappeared one day," Chivo continued. "They're asking 100,000 pesos just for the right to occupy the land. But I'd bet if someone showed up with 50, they'd hand it over just to get it off their books. The place is supposedly cursed, far from everything, only useful for someone who has nothing left to lose." Zeynep's heart skipped a beat. A trailer for 100,000 pesos, maybe less. She had 80. Was it possible? The negotiation and purchase. Zeynep approached the men, her steps firm despite her trembling knees. "Excuse me, gentlemen," she said, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. "I overheard you talking about that trailer in the forest. Exactly where is it located?" The 2 men looked at her in astonishment. Don Elias, the store owner, paused while weighing beans. "Señora," began Chivo with a half-smile. "That's no place for a woman, and especially not with children. It's 5 kilometers from the main road, deep in the forest near a dry riverbed. The trailer's on cement blocks, but the floor is rotted. No doors, broken windows, and people tell stories," added the other man, lowering his voice. "They say the American Howard didn't die. He was murdered over gambling debts, and at night strange noises come from there, like he's still guarding his things. Nobody goes near it after sunset." Zeynep swallowed hard but showed no fear. "And if someone offered 80,000 pesos, would they accept?" Chivo released a short laugh. "Señora, that thing isn't worth even 10, but if you have the courage to go live in that nest of vermin, I'll personally take you to the municipal secretary. I guarantee they'll accept it just to get it off their books." "Then let's do it," said Zeynep, untying the sock from her waist and counting the worn bills onto the counter. The sound of old paper seemed to echo in the silence of the store. "Here are 80,000 pesos. I want you to do me the favor of taking this offer to the secretary. Tell him it's all I have. My name is Zeynep Martinez, widow of Ramiro." The men exchanged glances. Don Elias, the shopkeeper, nodded slowly, as if recognizing desperation when he saw it. Chivo took the bills, weighed them in his hand, and finally nodded. "All right, Doña Zeynep, I'm going to take your money. Come back tomorrow at noon, and I'll tell you if the deal went through. But I'm warning you again, that place is going to cost you blood to make it livable. If it even can be." "I'm not afraid of hard work," responded Zeynep, and there was such determination in her voice that the men fell silent. Zeynep nearly dropped the metal. Her knees gave out, and she had to grip the edge of the rotted floor to keep from falling. There was a man hiding in a hole dug beneath her trailer. Her first thought was absolute terror. He was a criminal, a fugitive. The crazy American Howard, they said, was mad. Her children were in danger. She looked at Emirhan. who was trembling but held a stone in his hand, ready to defend his sisters. Zeynep's fear instantly transformed into protective fury. "Come out of there right now. Come out with your hands where I can see them. I won't repeat myself." But the only response was a dry cough and a groan of pain. "No, I can't. I'm hurt. Please, Senora, water, just water. They're looking for me." The voice was young, didn't sound threatening, only desperate. Zeynep was paralyzed, trapped between fear for her children and the plea in that voice. What could she do? Run to town? That would take hours, and she couldn't leave her children alone, nor could she drag them through the forest with a stranger hiding beneath her house. With her heart in her throat, Zeynep made a decision. She needed to see. She needed to know what she was facing. "Emirhan," she said, trying to keep her voice steady, "take your sisters outside. Stay by the big tree and don't move from there for any reason until I tell you to. Now." Emirhan, though frightened, obeyed. He grabbed the twins' hands, picked up Tadeo, and guided them outside the trailer. Zeynep waited until she heard their voices fade away. Alone in the trailer, with that dark hole breathing at her feet, she lit the only candle they had. The flame flickered weakly. "I'm going to lower the candle," she said aloud. "I'm going to see who you are. If you try anything, I swear by my children that I'll hurt you." Holding the candle in one hand and the metal tube in the other, she knelt and lowered the light into the darkness. The air rising from below was cold and smelled of damp earth and something else, the smell of sickness, and what the weak candlelight revealed made her stifle a scream. It wasn't very deep. The candle revealed walls of compacted earth, excavated by hand. It would be about 2 meters down, just enough for a man to sit but not to stand. There were rough holes carved into the earth wall as makeshift steps. The smell of sickness and fear was overwhelming. "Now I'm going down," said Zeynep, her voice echoing in the small space. "I'm not going to hurt you, I just want to see." She left the metal tube on the edge within reach, but descended alone with just the candle. Her bare feet searched for the holes in the earth. When her feet touched the compacted earth floor, she raised the candle, and what she saw froze the blood in her veins. Huddled in the farthest corner, curled into a ball, was a boy, not a man, barely an adolescent. He couldn't have been more than 19 or 20 years old. He had pale skin, or at least it was pale beneath the layer of dirt, mud, and dried blood. His blonde hair was matted. He was wearing what had once been jeans and a cotton shirt, now in tatters, stiff with dark, dried blood. One of his legs was extended at an unnatural angle, swollen and purple, with 2 dirty boards tied to the sides with strips of cloth. A crude splint. His face was disfigured by blows. One eye was completely swollen shut. His lip was split, and his hands were destroyed, nails broken, knuckles raw, as if he had tried to claw his way out. But his eyes, the one visible eye, were open and wild, fixed on her, with such pure animal terror that Zeynep felt a punch to her stomach. "My God," whispered Zeynep, feeling tears stream down her face. "For God's sake, what did they do to you?" The young man trembled so violently that his teeth chattered. He shrank even further against the earth wall, raising his destroyed hands in protection. No, don't turn me in," he begged, and his voice was a gravelly rasp, the Spanish broken by a distinctly North American accent. "Please, Senora, by the love of God, don't let them find me. They're going to kill me. I swear they'll kill me. I'd rather die here." Zeynep felt her heart break. He wasn't the American Howard. He wasn't a murderer. He was a child. A lost and terrified American boy, hidden under the earth like a wounded animal. The fear she felt for her children was still there, but now it was mixed with overwhelming compassion. "Calm down," she said gently, crouching slowly to not startle him further. "I'm not going to turn you into anyone. I won't hurt you. I swear it by the lives of my 5 children. I swear." The boy looked at her. Terror in his one good eye warred with a glimmer of hope. Who are you?" "My name is Zeynep. Zeynep Martinez. I just moved into this trailer a few hours ago. I didn't know anyone was here." "Nobody told me anything." She showed him her hands, dirty with mud and rotten wood. "I didn't know you were here. How long have you been down here, Alex?" The boy hesitated, his eyes darting from Zeynep's face to the dark opening above, as if calculating whether he could trust her. Finally, with barely audible words, he responded, "Alex. My name is Alex. Alex Thompson." "Alex," repeated Zeynep softly. The name sounded strange in the dampness of that hole. "How long have you been down here, Alex?" The boy looked into the darkness as if trying to count days on the walls of Earth. I don't know. The leg. I think it's been 2 weeks or more. Lost count of the suns. Zeynep felt a knot form in her throat. 2 weeks or more. This boy had been surviving in a hole underground, wounded, alone, while she had been fighting for a roof in town. And what did you eat? How? Zeynep asked. Alex lowered his eyes in shame. I had a backpack with granola bars. Ran out, I don't know, 5 days ago, maybe 6. There was a bottle of water, but that ran out too. I've been licking moisture from the earth. Zeynep's stomach contracted. And your leg? What happened? Those bruises? Alex closed his one good eye as if reliving the moment. I was pushed. They pushed me from a truck. I tried to run, but they caught me. They hit me with rifle butts. I thought they were going to kill me right there in the forest. They broke my leg by kicking me. Then they laughed and left. They left me there for the coyotes to eat. Who? Asked Zeynep, her voice barely a whisper. Who did this to you? Terror returned to Alex's face, so intense that Zeynep stepped back. Them, Don Artemio's men, the guards from the sawmill. Zeynep felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold of the hole. Don Artemio was the owner of half the town, a powerful and feared man, said to control everything from the lumber business to the rural police. They're looking for me, continued Alex, his voice dropping to a terrified whisper despite them being alone. They offered money for me. I heard about it in town before they found me. 50,000. 50,000 for finding the American spy. It was an unimaginable fortune. Zeynep could feel the weight of that number. With that money, she could buy a real house in Chihuahua, send her children to school, live without fear, without hunger. All she had to do was leave this hole, walk to town, find Don Artemio, and tell him where the boy was. It would guarantee the future of her 5 children. But then she looked at those terrified eyes, that broken body, that child, because that's what he was, a child, foreign and shattered. She looked at her own hands, calloused from washing other people's clothes, from pulling up rotten wood to give her children a roof. And Zeynep knew there was no choice. Not really. There was no choice. You're not going to die here, she said finally, her voice trembling but filled with a conviction she didn't know she possessed. And they're not going to find you. We'll find a way. How? Whispered Alex, trembling. There's no way, senora. I'm finished. My leg smells bad. Gangrene, right? If I stay down here, I'll die of gangrene in this hole. Then you're not staying down here, said Zeynep sharply, the decision giving her strength. You need to move to the trailer. We need to clean that leg. It's very bad. You have to eat and something for that wound. Are you going to turn me in? Asked Alex, trembling. Zeynep looked him straight in the eyes and told him the truth she felt in her gut. No, I won't, but you need to tell me your story. You need to tell me how you got here, why they call you a spy, why they're looking for you. I need to know what I'm getting my children into. Alex nodded slowly, relief flooding his face, though terror still clung to him. Zeynep climbed the earth steps, her body heavy, not just from the effort, but from the weight of the decision she had just made. She called Mateo. The children ran in, their pale faces filled with fear. What was it, Mama? A ghost, asked Emirhan. Zeynep hugged them all tightly, her heart pounding against her ribs. Listen to me carefully, she said, her voice low and urgent, kneeling to look them in the eyes. It's not a ghost. It's a person, a boy. He's very hurt and very scared. He's hiding. He's in trouble. Emirhan's eyes widened. Hiding from who? Is he a thief? No, said Zeynep firmly. It's bad people who hurt him. Powerful people from town. Now listen to me. This is the most important thing I've ever asked you. Nobody, absolutely nobody, can know that he's here. Not your friends from town, not Don Elias, not even the priest. Nobody. If someone asks, we didn't hear anything, we didn't see anything. If you talk, those bad people will come. And they won't just take him. They'll hurt us too. Do you understand the danger? The children nodded, their faces solemn under the weight of a secret they barely understood. Promise it by your father, whispered Zeynep. Promise by Papa. We promise, Mama, said Emirhan, his child's voice trying to sound like a man. Zeynep covered the hole again with the boards, disguising them as best she could with pieces of rotten wood and earth. Stay here and play quietly. Don't go outside. She ran to where they kept their meager supplies. They had some corn, lard, and a paper bag with pinole that Don Elias had given them. No bread, no medicine. She filled a metal jar with water from the stream the girls had carried, mixed a little pignole with cold water in a dirty plastic cup. It was a miserable meal, but it was all she had. She returned to the hole, removed the boards, and descended carefully. She found Alex where she had left him, trembling in the corner. "Here," she said, extending the jar of water. "Drink slowly. Your stomach isn't used to it." Alex grabbed the jar with his destroyed hands and drank the water running down his dirty chin, tears of relief and pain mixing with the liquid. It was like watching a dead man come back to life. He drank almost half before Zeynep gently took it back. "Slowly. Now eat this." She gave him the cup with pinole. Alex devoured it, using his damaged fingers to scrape the sides without caring about the dirt. Each swallow was a painful effort. When he finished, he leaned back against the earth wall, closing his one good eye for a moment. The immediate relief from food and water seemed to give him some clarity. He opened it and looked at Zeynep, a gratitude in his gaze so deep that it hurt her. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank God, thank you." Zeynep sat on the cold ground across from him. "Now talk, Alex, why? Why do they call you a spy? What did you see?" Alex took a deep breath, the air whistling in his chest. I'm a student at the University of Colorado. I was studying biology, conservation. I came to Mexico as a volunteer for a project about illegal logging in the Sierra Tarahumara." Zeynep nodded, understanding the lumber, the sawmill, Don Artemio's operation. "I had a camera," continued Alex, his voice even lower. "I was documenting, not just the trees, but the trucks that left at night loaded with enormous logs of 1,000-year-old trees. They used routes that weren't on any maps. But it wasn't just lumber, Zeynep," said Alex, his voice dropping to a terrified whisper despite them being alone. "It was something else. One night I followed the trucks. They left the lumber route and drove down a canyon that's not on any map. I drove my Jeep as far as I could and then walked. There was a clandestine airstrip, small, just dirt, but lit with generators." He stopped, swallowing hard, the memory vivid in his good eye. "I saw them unloading the logs, but some were hollow. They were taking packages out, packages wrapped in tan tape and loading weapons into the same hollows. It was an exchange. I saw Don Artemio himself there talking to men who weren't from here. They spoke English like me, but they were different expensive clothes. And I saw the head of the rural police, Comandante Valles, receiving a briefcase." Zeynep closed her eyes, imagining the terror. "I was hiding between the rocks," continued Alex, his body trembling at the memory. "I was taking photos with a long lens. I had to do it. I had proof, but I stepped on a branch. A small sound, but one of the guards heard me. He shouted. They started shooting. I ran like I've never run in my life, back toward my Jeep. But they were faster. They knew the terrain. They surrounded me. I had nothing, just my camera. They dragged me back to the clearing in front of Don Artemio. He didn't even look at me. He just said, 'Take the camera and burn it.' And him? 'Make sure the coyotes have a nice dinner tonight. Make it look like an accident, like the gringo got lost and fell off a cliff.' Zeynep felt every word like a blade. They beat me.